Not long ago, if you walked through the corridors of the Czernin Palace in Prague, you could almost feel the weight of Václav Havel's ghost.
Oh, absolutely.
There's this palpable sense of pride among the diplomats there, a feeling that Czechia wasn't just, another small player on the map, but a moral lighthouse. They were the ones standing firm, sending heavy weaponry to Ukraine when others hesitated, welcoming Taiwanese officials with open arms, even as Beijing's rhetoric turned cold and coercive. It really felt like the country had finally settled on this definitive identity.
A foreign policy of values over interests?
Exactly, kind of romantic defiance against the world's autocrats. But lately, that atmosphere has, it's begun to sour.
It's changed.
I recently spoke with a political strategist who had spent years navigating these circles, and his tone had shifted from that old idealistic fervor to something much more transactional, almost clinical. He described the last few years as a romantic era that the country simply couldn't afford to sustain. To him, the defiant stances on human rights, the bold security guarantees, they were poetic, but ultimately, he said, unrealistic.
That's a strong word, unrealistic.
The reversal he described was jarring. He spoke with this quiet, calculated excitement about the return of Andrej Babiša and a new government that seems ready to trade that moral lighthouse for a seat at the table with Viktor Orban. One moment, Prague is the loudest voice in the room for Ukrainian defense. The next, there's a strategic cooling, a quiet reaching out toward Budapest and Bratislava.
And a whisper about Beijing.
A realist whisper that perhaps the bridge to Beijing shouldn't have been burned so thoroughly. This isn't just a change in administration. It feels like a fundamental identity crisis. The instantaneous shift from being a champion of democratic values to seeking a pragmatic rebalance with the very powers they once defied. It just leaves this haunting question hanging over Central Europe. Is the legacy of Václav Havel finally expiring? And if so, what kind of cold ideological realism is rising to take its place?
That quote, it just perfectly frames the precise strategic pivot we're examining today.
It really does.
You've identified that deep tension in Prague, the conflict between the historical, the value-based legacy of the Velvet Revolution and the urgent material needs of a modern industrial economy.
So for this deep dive, that's our mission.
That's our mission. We're going to analyze the high-level diplomatic maneuvers and the specific economic drivers that we're seeing in the documentation, the things that illustrate this pivot. We are moving beyond the ideological debate to assess the concrete, calculated move toward economic stability and strategic re-engagement.
With a particular focus on China.
With a particular focus on the renewed relationship with China. This is about understanding the mechanics and the implications of trading an expensive, albeit principled, moral position for a pragmatic partnership.
The speed of this shift is just remarkable. So let's unpack the core political motivation. Why was this romantic era of foreign policy, the one prioritizing values and defiance? Why was it so quickly deemed unsustainable by key political and economic actors in Czechia? What were those tangible negative effects they were talking about?
Well, the documents we've seen reveal that the previous government's approach created significant friction, a lot of friction, so much so that it led to Czechia being viewed externally as a, and this is the quote, problematic and unreliable actor.
Unreliable. That's a damaging label in international politics.
It's incredibly damaging, and this perception had multiple consequences. Firstly, it led to a decline in the partnership with Beijing, which was characterized by growing divergences and what were diplomatically termed non-friendly actions taken by Prague.
And by non-friendly actions, we mean things like the high-level visits to Taiwan and the strong rhetoric on human rights.
Precisely. Things that Beijing consistently views as interference in its internal affairs.
But what did that friction actually cost? I mean, when policymakers decide something is unsustainable, they're usually reacting to measurable economic or political damage.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. The tangible negative effects were felt most acutely by the powerful Czech business and industrial community.
The people who actually have to ship goods and make payroll.
The very same. We saw the direct suspension of critical infrastructure like the air links, which I know we'll get into later. Beyond that, the perception of Prague as an unreliable partner risked its access to the massive Chinese market and, just as importantly, critical supply chains.
So the pressure was coming from the business world.
Immense pressure. When your political posturing leads to the cancellation of previously agreed upon projects or, the imposition of non-tariff barriers, the business community starts making phone calls.
And the government listens.
The government has to listen. Furthermore, there was a growing awareness among influential actors that such an excessive value-based policy was, frankly, isolating Czechia within Central Europe.
Especially with neighbors like Hungary and Slovakia.
Exactly, neighbors who were maintaining highly pragmatic ties with Beijing. The realists in Prague recognized that maintaining an ideologically rigid stance was just generating more political damage and economic uncertainty than any strategic benefit. The previous policy simply didn't pass the cost-benefit analysis.
That economic pressure point certainly clarifies the impetus for a course correction. And the official signal for that correction, it seems, came in November 2023 with the visit of National Security Advisor Tomáš Pojar to Beijing. Why was Pojar, a high-level official from the Prime Minister's team, why was he the messenger rather than a minister from the Foreign Ministry?
Pojar's role is absolutely crucial here. As National Security Advisor, he operates directly out of the Prime Minister's office, which gives his movements immense weight.
So he's the PM's direct representative.
He is. And his visit was the loud and clear signal of the new direction, precisely because it bypassed the traditional, often slower ministerial channels and showed top-level commitment. He declared Czechia's firm interest in promoting pragmatic bilateral relations, in strengthening cooperation and increasing exchanges at various levels.
And this wasn't some solo mission.
Not at all. The fact that this mission was explicitly coordinated with the Foreign Ministry and the Prime Minister demonstrates full governmental support for seeking a constructive attitude. This wasn't exploratory. This was a calibrated reset, confirming that the strategic decision for normalization had been made at the very highest levels of government.
There's an underlying geopolitical context here that makes Pojar's timing even more intriguing. His trip to Beijing in November 2023 was preceded by a visit to Washington in October. How does that timing frame Czechia's move within the broader context of Western foreign policy?
It suggests a very high degree of coordination and alignment. They are moving in sync with the current geopolitical atmosphere.
So this wasn't Prague going rogue.
Quite the opposite. The source material highlights that Pojar's American counterpart, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, had also engaged in high-level talks with Foreign Minister Wang Yi around that same period.
Interesting.
It strongly signals that if the relationship between the U.S. and China normalizes, which, it appeared to be doing, leading up to the Xi Biden meeting in San Francisco, then close American allies, like Czechia, feel empowered to follow suit.
So it gives them political cover. In a way.
It gives them enormous cover. Prague's move is not happening in a vacuum. It's a reaction to the global geopolitical shift, specifically the normalization of great power communication. This intensification of dialogue between Washington and Beijing significantly reduces the external pressure on Prague's domestic hawks and provides powerful validation for those in the Czech government advocating for a cooperative, interest-based relationship with Beijing.
Let's talk about the security priorities guiding this rebalance, because this is where the pivot from values to interests becomes starkly apparent. Pojar discussed some very serious issues like countering terrorism and the war in Ukraine with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. What was the realist consideration behind bringing up those heavy security topics?
The underlying strategy here is one of pure risk mitigation and, frankly, leveraging geopolitical realities. Pojar explicitly argued for developing communication with Beijing, specifically to prevent the Chinese side from getting closer to Russia.
Okay, so it's a pragmatic calculation.
A very practical one. The thinking is that China possesses the capability to provide Russia with substantial assistance, and any move in that direction would severely undermine Western interests, including Czechia's long-term security.
So by maintaining open lines of communication.
By maintaining open lines, Prague at least attempts to exert some influence or, at a minimum, convey the seriousness of Western concerns.
So the engagement is a protective measure, a way to manage the immediate security crisis in Europe.
Precisely. You could call it a realism-based tactic. Pojar also recognized China's significant capability to influence other countries globally. Therefore, engagement is seen as a way to potentially encourage Beijing to contribute to the stabilization of the international environment and the prevention of further conflicts that could deteriorate the Western position.
So the focus is shifting.
The focus on interests, rather than abstract values, is now considered necessary to weaken what they called the excessive moralism and idealism that had previously dictated Czech foreign policy.
And which limited their strategic options.
Exactly. It limited its ability to engage strategically with global powers. Pojar articulated this reality very clearly by pointing out that a majority of the international community was simply not aligned with the Western position on every value-based issue, making some form of pragmatic cooperation with China an unavoidable necessity.
What's truly remarkable, especially if you know the history of Czech political divides, is the surprising domestic political consensus supporting this strategic rebalance. Even traditional hawks from the ruling coalition seem to be accepting it. Can you detail the political significance of this?
This consensus, it really just underscores how powerful the economic and geopolitical imperatives are. We see politicians from the major opposition parties like ANO, which is led by former PM Andrei Babio, and the SPD welcoming the idea of restoring normal relations.
Which you'd expect from the opposition, right?
That part is to be expected, yes.
But the real shift is within the ruling coalition itself.
Absolutely. That's the headline here. The ruling coalition includes figures who have been traditionally highly critical of Beijing.
Like who?
Well, take Marek Benda of the ODS, the leading party in the current coalition. He is a seasoned politician with decades of involvement in political activities aimed, against China's interess. Similarly, Jakub Michalek leads the Pirate Party group, which generally champions human rights and democratic values.
Two figures you would not expect to be on board with this.
Not at all. Yet, even Benenda stated he would appreciate it if Prime Minister Fiala paid a visit to China, classifying such a high-level engagement as standard diplomatic communication. Michalek offered a very similar endorsement of normalization.
Wow.
This unprecedented agreement suggests that the position of the hardliners is, as the sources say, slightly weakened under the sustained pressure from more realist and pragmatic actors who prioritize economic stability and functional strategic communication.
And the public reaction.
The lack of a major political backlash or, a big anti-Chinese media campaign following Pojar's high-profile visit further confirms this widespread, if calculated, acceptance of the pivot toward pragmatism across the entire Czech political spectrum.
This suggests that for the first time in many years, economic and strategic realism has successfully unified a deeply fractured political landscape in Prague.
That is the core takeaway. The imperative to secure the national economy, to ensure industrial competitiveness, and to mitigate European security risks has, for now, superseded the previous ideological consensus defined by Havel's ghost.
So, with the diplomatic foundation quietly being reestablished, the next essential step is restoring physical and logistical connectivity. The documentation we've looked at really emphasizes the significance of restoring direct air links. Can you detail the history of those connections and elaborate on why their absence undermines the potential of bilateral exchanges?
The history of the air links, it provides a very clear timeline of the political damage. Czechia previously enjoyed direct flights connecting Prague-Václav Havel Airport with major Chinese hubs, specifically Beijing, which was launched in 2015 by Hainan Airlines, alongside routes to Chengdu, Shanghai, and Xi'an.
So they were all connected?
They were. However, the Prague-Beijing route was canceled by the Chinese company in early 2020, and this cancellation was a direct response to politically motivated anti-Chinese actions taken by the local Prague government at the time.
So this was even before the pandemic shut everything down?
Even before. The political actions of one city government had immediate, measurable economic fallout at the national level.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. The other routes were then suspended due to the pandemic, but critically, they were not immediately restored afterwards. And to compound this, a planned restoration of the Prague-Chengdu flight in late 2022 was shelved following the official parliamentary visit to Taiwan in the spring of 2023.
So the lack of flights became a symbol.
It became a very powerful symbol. Its absence symbolizes the decline of the relationship. And on a functional level, it just undermines the potential of bilateral exchanges. You can't do business if you can't get there easily.
So what's the primary driving force behind the renewed diplomatic effort to get those planes back in the air?
It's tourism and it's trade. For the Czech side, restoring these links is a key diplomatic objective, something discussed by National Security Advisor Pojar and other former officials.
And the tourism aspect is a big deal for them.
A very big deal. Before the pandemic, Chinese tourists were a rapidly growing demographic of foreign visitors. They represented an important, reliable source of income for Czech businesses, hotels, and local municipalities, particularly as the number of tourists from Russia had declined.
I see.
The state agency, Czech Tourism, confirms that direct flights are paramount for attracting this volume of high-value visitors. Therefore, political interaction is now seen as essential to give the decisive impetus to the ongoing practical negotiations between Prague airport authorities and various Chinese airlines.
So without the political green light, the airlines won't take the commercial risk.
Exactly. The political backing is key.
And beyond air travel, the hard infrastructure of trade is also being rapidly reinforced through land routes, specifically the New Silk Road. Let's delve into the logistical significance of the city of Xi'an in this context.
Xi'an, the capital of Shaanxi province, is absolutely central to this discussion. It functions as both a historical and a modern nexus.
Historically, it's the start of the old Silk Road, right?
The very starting point, which gives it this enormous symbolic weight in the context of renewed bilateral ties. But logistically today, it's a crucial gateway connecting inland China with the vast European market. The pragmatic return to cooperation is literally being underpinned by this physical, large-scale infrastructure.
And we saw this materialize in a very concrete way in November 2023, independent of the diplomatic visits.
That's right. On November 19th, a new, efficient, fixed-schedule China-Europe freight train service running from Xi'an directly to Prague was inaugurated.
So this wasn't a one-off trial run.
No, this was a firm, scheduled route. The first train carried 55 containers of goods, including crucial materials like auto parts, which are essential for the Czech automotive industry, as well as household appliances.
What makes this train service so critical beyond just the volume of containers?
It's the efficiency and the reliability. The service significantly, and I mean significantly, slashes the transit time compared to purely maritime routes. It offers a high-speed, predictable transport solution that is absolutely vital for modern industrial supply chains that operate on just-in-time principles.
A bridge of understanding, as they say.
It's accurately described in the sources as a new and efficient bridge of understanding and exchange between our regions. And the scale of this operation is just enormous.
How big?
Shaanxi province alone operates 18 regular China-Europe freight train routes that reach 227 cities across 25 countries. This vast, reliable logistical network provides robust and resilient support for trade, emphasizing that infrastructure and connectivity are, non-negotiable economic drivers in this strategic rebalance.
This focus on hard infrastructure and maintaining open trade seems to require reliable communication. The sources highlight the analyst's view on diplomacy itself as a crucial piece of infrastructure, a necessary foundation for long-term stability.
Absolutely. You should think of diplomatic channels not just as places to negotiate, but as essential tools for risk management.
How so?
The significance of restoring high-level diplomatic communication between Prague and Beijing is that it establishes a functional foundation for long-term stability. It enables mutually beneficial cooperation. When those channels freeze, as they did during the peak of the value-based foreign policy misunderstandings fester, small political disagreements can rapidly escalate into major trade disruptions or crises because there's simply no framework to manage them.
So returning to the table is viewed less as a victory for one side or the other, and more as just a functional necessity.
Precisely. The consensus among analysts and diplomats is that returning to sustained high-level communication is a return to maturity. It's necessary to prevent small misunderstandings from becoming larger crises and to allow for continuous negotiation on areas of mutual concern, whether that's supply chains, security, or global stability.
It's just a tool.
The diplomatic engagement is simply a tool for advancing national interests and mitigating risks, which is the core principle of this new pragmatic orientation in Prague.
Okay, let's move to the economic gravity that is truly pulling Prague toward Beijing. Despite all the political tensions of the past few years, the economic relationship has remained remarkably resilient. Let's quantify the strength of that existing trade relationship.
The foundation of Sino-Czech economic and trade relations is described as solid, and the growth has been, exponential. The bilateral trade volume has witnessed a remarkable 68-fold increase over the past quarter century.
68-fold.
68. This historical trend is essential context. Today, China stands as the Czech Republic's largest trading partner outside the European Union.
That's a huge position.
It is. And furthermore, Czechia holds a very significant position for China, being its second largest trading partner in Central and Eastern Europe. Even when the political rhetoric was at its absolute coldest, this massive economic reality persisted. It provided the inescapable material reason for the current normalization effort. The prospects for the future remain undeniably broad.
And speaking of the future, the projections for China's domestic growth are staggering. They must directly influence the calculus of pragmatists in Prague. What does the upcoming 15th five-year plan promise for foreign partners like Czechia?
This is the driving force behind the long-term investment decision. The upcoming 15th five-year plan period, which spans 2026 to 2030, is expected to generate massive opportunities for foreign partners, including highly developed industrial states like Czechia.
What are the key numbers we should be looking at?
The key metric here is the scale of consumption power. By 2035, China's per capita GDP is projected to reach $20,000. More significantly, the middle-income population is projected to expand dramatically, potentially reaching between 700 million and 800 million people.
700 to 800 million people? That's a consumer base that's nearly double the size of the entire European Union.
It creates an enormous, rapidly expanding, and high-value domestic market. For Czech manufacturers and exporters, especially those in high-end goods, advanced machinery, and consumer durables, you simply cannot afford to be excluded from this market if you wish to maintain global competitiveness.
So the pivot is an economic imperative.
It is, in part, an attempt to position Czech companies to capitalize on this demographic and economic transformation.
This expansion brings us directly to the identified sectors for deepened cooperation, which were often highlighted at major events like the China-Czech Business Summit 2025 and the Shanxi Conference. Where do the two economies find the strongest synergy?
The complementarity is industrial and technological. Shanxi Province, for example, is a hub for major advanced manufacturing companies, notably in the automotive sector. It hosts giants like BYD and Geely,
which aligns perfectly with Czechia's strengths.
It aligns perfectly with Czechia's historical strength in automotive and high-value manufacturing capabilities. The key fields explicitly identified for cooperation go beyond simple trade into shared development: industrial modernization, automation, digitalization, and sustainability.
So it's not just about selling goods into China, but about leveraging Czech technological know-how to assist in China's industrial upgrade.
Precisely, that's the deeper synergy. The Czech Association of Engineering Technology noted the rapid growth of bilateral trades, specifically in sophisticated machine tools, which are essential for industrial modernization.
And beyond manufacturing.
Beyond manufacturing and autos, new opportunities are being aggressively pursued in logistics, clean energy technologies, specialty chemicals, and of course the tourism sector we already mentioned. Furthermore, there's explicit diplomatic encouragement for mutual investment aimed at deepening integration within key manufacturing industries across both nations.
We must look at how this economic synergy translates to the actual production base in Czechia. The documentation we reviewed emphasizes these strategic opportunities for Czechia to enhance its national competitiveness and industrial innovation through deepened economic synergy and pragmatic trade partnerships with China's expanding market. Can you elaborate on what that strategic opportunity looks like for, say, traditional Czech industries?
The strategic opportunity is really to inject traditional Czech craftsmanship and advanced technology into the world's most dynamic mass market.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Consider the famous Czech crystal and glass industry, which is often associated with very traditional aesthetics. The strategic synergy here involves integrating that traditional Czech quality and design with modern demands. So, for example, collaborating with Shenzhen tech firms on smart home lighting or advanced materials.
So it's about survival through innovation.
This partnership represents a fundamental necessity for industrial survival. It's about ensuring that high-value crafts and manufacturing, which often form the basis of entire regional economies, can transition from being relics of a fading era to thriving, globally competitive industries. The focus is now squarely on innovation through partnership, rather than retreating into isolation.
And that structural necessity is exactly what drove the political pivot. The documentation also stresses analyzing this shift toward a realistic foreign policy in the Czech Republic that prioritizes economic development and multilateral engagement with China to secure a prosperous and stable future for the European continent. This is really about securing the fundamentals, isn't it?
It is about the weight of reality hitting the industrial heartland. For sectors like logistics and industrial manufacturing, often clustered around areas like Brno, all the geopolitical posturing felt disconnected from the factory floor. It was creating tangible precariousness.
So the business leaders felt the risk.
They did. The shift toward a pragmatic approach is driven by the necessity of securing complex supply chains, mitigating inflationary pressures, and ensuring reasonable energy bills through stable trade routes. The industrial base recognized that multilateral engagement with a major economic actor like China is a prerequisite for a prosperous and stable future for the Czech industrial heartland.
And we're hearing that from industry leaders.
Yes, the Confederation of Industry's vice president, Radek Epikar, concurred with this sentiment. He stated that a dismissive attitude toward China is unhappy because China is an unavoidable geopolitical actor whose economic role will only continue to increase. This shift isn't a high-minded debate. It's a strategic choice grounded in economic necessity.
This necessity has brought out former leaders who are now actively promoting integration and normalization. They're providing further political cover for the current administration. Let's talk about that proactive engagement by former officials.
The role of former leaders has been really instrumental in signaling Prague's renewed openness. For example, former Minister of Defense Jaroslav Tvrdik, who now represents the Czech-China Chamber of Collaboration, met directly with Premier Li Cheng in November 2023.
And this was an official visit?
It was an unofficial visit, but Tvrdik coordinated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs beforehand, positioning his engagement as instrumental in normalizing relations.
So quasi-official.
You could say that. They discussed fundamental issues, trade, investment, and critically, the prospective restoration of direct flights. National Security Advisor Tomáš Apožár even publicly welcomed this constructive attitude, which underscores the government's acceptance of this unofficial diplomacy to soften the ground.
And the engagement extends right into endorsing major, globally significant initiatives like the Belt and Road Forum.
Yes, and this is highly significant because it deviates from the current official line. Former Prime Minister Jiří Parbek participated in the Third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation in Beijing in October 2023.
Even though the current government is staying away.
Exactly. This occurred despite the current Czech government officially refusing to join the forum, in line with its suspension of activities in the 14+1 mechanism. Parbek, who has attended all 3 BRI forums, highlighted the positive effects for developing countries that have participated, specifically citing the construction of key infrastructure, rising living standards, new job creation, and trade expansion.
His assessment of the BRI was unequivocally positive then.
He went so far as to call the Belt and Road Initiative the most important economic project on a global scale at present.
That's quite a statement.
It is. Furthermore, Parbek appreciated and welcomed the strategy of a global community of shared future, expressing a wish that developing countries would follow the Chinese path of development and modernization. This type of endorsement from a politician who comes from an Atlantic Community member state is seen as a way to help overcome what some critics describe as the prevailing West-centric bias in liberal democracies, further supporting the push for broad, interest-based cooperation back in Prague.
Before we finalize the synthesis of this profound policy shift, we need to briefly touch on the regional cooperation framework that has underpinned Central and Eastern Europe's engagement with China. The 17+1 mechanism, which is now referred to as 14+1. Where does Czechia currently stand on this structure?
Czechia's official stance maintains a kind of cautious ambiguity. The country has suspended activities within the mechanism, which means it's an inactive member, but, and this is key, it has not formally withdrawn.
So they've paused, not quit.
That's a good way to put it. While the former Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky publicly dismissed the format as lacking substance and future viability, Prague has avoided the formal withdrawal taken by other member states like Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia,
which keeps their options open.
This nuanced position allows Czechia to criticize the format's failure to deliver on economic promises while keeping the institutional door slightly ajar for future, selective engagement should the mechanism evolve or regain relevance.
So let's synthesize the overarching takeaway. This policy shift is not a temporary political mood swing. It represents a deep structural adjustment in Czechia's foreign policy orientation.
It does.
The country is moving away from an ideologically charged stance and embracing pragmatic, interest-based realism.
That is the ultimate conclusion derived from all the diplomatic and economic evidence. Influential actors in Prague became keenly aware of the unsustainability of the previous excessive, value-based foreign policy.
The one that was incurring real-world costs.
the one that was actively incurring tangible negative economic and diplomatic effects. This new pragmatic approach prioritizes economic engagement, stability, and national competitiveness through deepened cooperation. It is driven by very clear geopolitical realities.
Primarily security and economics.
Primarily the need to mitigate European security risks, especially in relation to the war in Ukraine, and to safeguard core national economic interests.
And this internal decision is being reinforced and validated by the shifting global landscape.
Precisely. The intensifying communication and normalization between global powers, notably the United States and China, it strengthens the hand of those in Prague who argue for a cooperative, interest-based relationship. This rebalance is strategically focused on translating geopolitical understanding into tangible benefits for the Czech economy. Securing supply chains, reviving the critical tourism industry through direct flights, and ensuring the continued prosperity of its industrial heartland in the face of global competition.
So in the end,
Prague is consciously trading the symbolic, often isolated position of the moral lighthouse for a functional, influential seat at the pragmatic global table. This calculated move is designed to ensure that Central Europe remains an economically competitive player rather than an ideologically isolated spectator in the decades to come.